So now let's look at this diagrammatically. So we have here now a diagram similar to the previous one, but now the uniform price is less than the intercept in the low demand market. So under uniform pricing, there is a positive quantity sold in both markets. So now let's look at what happens when we move to third degree price discrimination. So as usual, we find the intersection between marginal revenue and marginal cost in each market. So the MALPA essentially treats each market separately, finds the optimal quantity and the optimal price. So the optimal quantity is here, it's QDH. The optimal price is up here, it's PDH. And we do the same in market L. We find the intersection between marginal revenue and marginal cost. We get the optimal quantity QDL and the optimal price PDL. And we see that the quantity has gone up in the low demand market, it's gone down in the high demand market, the price has gone down in the low demand market, and it's gone up in the high demand market. Now what effect does this have on welfare? So let's look at the high demand market first. We have this reduction in quantity, so there's a reduction in welfare equal to the area between the demand curve in the high demand market and the marginal cost curve and those two quantities. So it's this blue area here. So this is the change in welfare in the high demand market. It's negative because the quantity has gone down. Now what about the low demand market? Well, there's an increase in quantity. Again, we're looking at the area between the demand curve and the marginal cost curve. So that area then is this one here. So this is the change in welfare in the low demand market, and that's positive because there's an increase in the quantity. Now what about the overall change in welfare? So the notation I'm going to use here is the overall change in welfare is denoted delta W. That's equal to the change in welfare between the welfare under price discrimination and under uniform pricing, which we can split up between the two markets. So we have a change in welfare in market L is equal to the change in welfare as we move from uniform pricing to third degree price discrimination, and we have a similar thing in market H. And the notation for output is going to be similar. I'll denote the total quantity under third degree price discrimination with a QD, so that's QDL plus QDH, and the total quantity under uniform pricing is QUL plus QUH. So we're going to see that whether the change in welfare can be positive depends on whether the quantity under third degree price discrimination is more than the quantity under uniform pricing. So let's write down some inequalities to show when welfare can be positive. So let's look at market L first. So we found that the change in welfare is positive in market L, and we're going to be able to bound this above by an expression. So we're going to write down an expression here which we know is bigger than the change in welfare in market L. So let's look at this area. So this area in blue is less than this rectangle. So if I carry this line up, we've got a rectangle here. And we know that the blue area is smaller than that rectangle. So if we get an expression for that rectangle, then we know that the change in welfare in the low demand market is less than the value of that expression. So let's think about this rectangle. We need its height, we need its width. Its height is PU minus C. So the difference between the uniform price and the marginal cost. And then the width is going to be the difference between these two quantities, the quantity under price discrimination and the quantity under uniform pricing. So we know that the change in welfare in market L is going to be less than the price minus the marginal cost times the change in quantity. We can do a similar thing in market H. So let's write down the change in welfare in market H, and we're going to provide a bound for that as well. So one thing to remember first is that the change in welfare in market H is less than 0. So this blue area represents a decrease in welfare. Now we're going to bound this above by a rectangle, and we're going to again use this rectangle. And we're going to use a rectangle with a height equal to the difference between the uniform price and the marginal cost. So this rectangle here is PU minus C times QDH minus QUH. Now note, this is negative because this is less than that. And so this quantity is greater than or equal to WH. So to see why this quantity is bigger than that quantity, let's introduce some numbers. So let's suppose that this area in blue is equal to 8. So that's the absolute value of the change in welfare. And let's suppose that the rectangle has an area of 6. 8 is bigger than 6. But remember, this is actually negative, so if we look at the actual change in welfare, it's negative 8. And if we multiply both sides by -1, this is -6, remember we reverse the inequality. -8 is less than -6. The change in welfare is more negative than the negative of the rectangle. Okay, so now we have a bound for the change in welfare in each market. What about the overall change in welfare? Well, we can't say what happens for sure because we don't know whether the reduction in welfare here is more than the gain in welfare here. So let's write down a bound for the overall change in welfare. So the overall change in welfare is equal to the sum of the changes in welfare in each of the two markets. So we need to add up this quantity and this quantity. So we can sum these two bounds and we'll get a bound for the overall change in welfare. So the thing in the front here in both of these bounds is the same. We just need to sum the expressions in these two sets of parentheses. So QDL plus QDH is just QD, the overall quantity under price discrimination, and QUL plus QUH is the overall quantity under uniform pricing, and we have this negative sign here. So we have a bound for the change in welfare. The change in welfare is less than or equal to this quantity, which is the price under uniform pricing minus the marginal cost multiplied by the change in the quantity from uniform pricing to price discrimination. So in the red box here we have that inequality. And what can we conclude from this inequality? Well, we can conclude two things. So first of all, let's think about the case where the quantity under third degree price discrimination is less than the quantity under uniform pricing. Then this is going to be negative. And because the price is more than the marginal cost, this expression will be negative, and therefore the change in welfare will also be negative. The welfare under third degree price discrimination is less than the welfare under uniform pricing. So a sufficient condition for welfare to fall is that the total quantity falls under price discrimination. So this just goes back to the earlier intuition. If the quantity under third degree price discrimination is lower than uniform pricing, welfare must have gone down under price discrimination, because third degree price discrimination also has this bad effect of distributing a given quantity inefficiently. So there are two bad things about third degree price discrimination, a lower quantity and a worse distribution of that quantity. Now, when can the welfare be higher under third degree price discrimination? So when can we have WD more than WU? Well, let's look at the inequality. When can this be positive? Well, it can only be positive if this is also positive. That is, if QD is more than QU. So we know if welfare has gone up under third degree price discrimination, it must be that the quantity has gone up. So a necessary condition for welfare to rise under third degree price discrimination is that the total quantity goes up under third degree price discrimination. Again, just because third degree price discrimination has this bad effect of distributing a given quantity inefficiently. So just to summarize all that, if the quantity goes down under third degree price discrimination, then welfare has to have gone down. If welfare has gone up, it must be that the quantity has gone up under third degree price discrimination. So why did we go through all that? Well, this inequality gives us a test for whether third degree price discrimination is a bad thing or a good thing for society. So we know that if we go from allowing third degree price discrimination to not allowing it, and the quantity goes up, then that move was a good thing. We also know if we go from not allowing price discrimination to allowing it, and the quantity goes down, that's a bad thing. So this gives us a simple way to test whether price discrimination is bad or good. We can just look at the quantity and how that changes as we go from uniform pricing to price discrimination, or vice versa.